During the 1950s and 1960s, community schools for children and youth with developmental disabilities in Alberta were first built. Two mothers led the way. They were Winifred Stewart of Edmonton and Christine Meikle of Calgary. Both Winifred and Christine had sons with Down syndrome. Winifred and Christine tried to register their sons for public school, but they were turned away. In the 1950s, the belief at that time was that people with developmental disabilities couldn't be educated. These children were often sent away to live in institutions like the Provincial Training School in Red Deer. Both Winifred and Christine did not want to send their sons to live in an institution. They wanted to give them an education in the community. Because public schools would not typically accept children with disabilities, Winifred and Christine decided to build their own community schools to educate children and youth with developmental disabilities. The Alberta government passed a law in 1918 called the Mental Defectives Act. The law gave families permission to have their relatives with disabilities placed in institutions. At the time, the main idea of professionals in the disability field was that people with disabilities were better off living in an institution and away from the community and their families. During the 1950s, Winifred and Christine met with other parents who had children with disabilities. They formed parent associations, now known as the Associations for Community Living. These parents worked hard to get support and donations from their communities, business, and the government. In 1953, the first classes for children with developmental disabilities began in Edmonton and Calgary. By 1955, the Winifred Stewart School opened in Edmonton, and in 1958, the Christine Meikle School opened in Calgary. Finally, Alberta's children and youth with developmental disabilities had schools of their own. More schools were built in other cities in Alberta in the 1960s. Winifred Stewart and Christine Meikle knew their children with disabilities could learn and had the right to go to school like other children in the community. They built the first schools in Alberta for children and youth with developmental disabilities. They showed the community that their children could learn skills and were valuable members of society. Now let's watch Winifred Stewart's story told by a former student, parent, and teacher who knew her.
I am Rose Sembelik, and I worked at the Winifred Stewart School for 22 years, volunteered for 3 years. Well, I have a son, and when I brought him to Winifred Stewart, she says, "Oh, bring him in tomorrow." He was about 4 years old, and she says, "Bring him in on Friday." So I brought him in on Friday, and I volunteered 3 days a week for 3 years. And then when Winifred Stewart asked me to go upstairs and become one of the teachers, take classes at university, and become a teacher, and that I did, very excitedly. When I first walked in with my son, she had a very tiny office, and I figured, oh my God, what's this? And of course that was just the beginning of Winifred Stewart. And so she said to me, would you like to volunteer? And she checked him over, and he said, oh, he's definitely would be very good here. And I said, but he's very slow in speech. And she said, oh, that'll come slow, but sure. So I said, okay. So he started on Monday morning, and has been there ever since, and that's how I became involved. And she was a very kind person to these. She never was angry with the children. She'd say, darling, we would be so cross while teaching because they had done something wrong. And she'd say, oh, darling, you can't do that. I first started as just an assistant with all the teachers. And then I got a classroom. And then I became supervisor for 6 classrooms. And then I became a vice principal in the end, with 450 students and 65 teachers. When I was in the classroom, I would start the day with good morning, and I would say, and because there was so little speech with Down syndrome especially, I would say, what do you say with a particular child? What do you say? And then he'd say, good morning, whatever way he could. And then I would say to them, okay, we will start the morning with who's here? I'll have roll call. And they would say, I say, Mark Watson, I am here. And that would introduce them to talking more. Otherwise, they say yes, or put their hand up. And I say, no, I am Mark Watson. So slowly we'd get them talking. Then I have them march around the desks and to improve their walk, because they were quite tiny at the time. And that would improve their walk. And then I would have them go to the board and show me, today is, and I'd ask them in order, what day is it? And of course, most of them wouldn't know, and I would tell them, everybody at the same time say Wednesday, Monday, or whatever it was. And that would introduce them into talking more. And then I'd give them a paper and pencil and tell them to write, print. And of course, you know what the printing in the beginning would be like. But by the time the year was over, they could print their name and the day that it is. And for those that were capable, they went on to grade 1. And if they were not capable, we still kept teaching them until we saw that they've reached their potential in the, I would say, the kindergarten stage. And then we would say, okay. And sometimes they were there till about 12 years. Then we would say, okay, we'd still give them a chance at taking grade 1. And if they were not, they'd stay there for about a year or two, and then they would go into the craft center and learn trades. And in the craft center, we had many, many trades: sewing, cooking, and they all had one music lesson a week, one swimming a week, one music, swimming, and phys ed. They all had one of those a week with 54 classes. In those days, we didn't have computers. So I had to all figure it out, these some 22 classrooms to have one of those a week. And half-hour lessons sometimes for those that needed more. Some were, you know, physically handicapped. We'd give them 2 a week, go in with another class and have their swimming or phys ed or music, whichever it was. And the music teacher would make sure he'd make a little orchestra. He would have all the instruments for them, which was very, very interesting. And they loved it. And the same with swimming. We had a swimming teacher full-time, music teacher full-time, phys ed full-time. And after that, and when they would go home, I would say, okay, whose turn is it? So we would sing, and they loved singing. So I would go into singing. I had 10 in the classroom. 10 little dicky birds sitting on a fence. One went, put on his shoes, and the other went home. Her kindness, and how dedicated she was to the handicapped. Very dedicated. She just felt that she couldn't turn anybody down. She tried her hardest to do whatever she was best for any child. And her kindness was what really got me more than anything. I guess equality. She felt that these children should, the handicapped especially, should have the same chances as the others if they are capable, and to work with them to their fullest potential. And once they reach their fullest potential, then we would have to look for other sources. Oh, I don't think it was, if it wasn't for Mrs. Stewart, we would have what we have right now at the Winifred Stewart. And as you know, it has developed into something very big right now. We had a school exchange program with Ontario, and they brought 4 students out to our school, and then we sent 4 students out there. And as a matter of fact, the teacher came with them, and she stayed with me. And she would tell me what a wonderful thing that Mrs. Stewart started such a thing, because everybody noticed that there's a place for handicap. They didn't have to stay at home. So I think her legacy would be what she did for handicapped people. For what she has done, I don't think my son would have a place today. I don't think he would have had the upbringing that the school offered him. I don't think, and to have these boarding homes for the children, I think it's fantastic. I mean, I'm getting old, and so are a lot of other people. And you know, it is time for us to have a little time to ourselves and have a place for our students, and we know they're well looked after and have a place to go. And they have programs for them, day programs and evening programs as well. I think they were just beginning to get adjusted to them, because prior to that it was something that you put in your closets and you don't bring them out. But once Winifred Stewart started, and we went, you know, we went out collecting and everything else, and people realized that they were humans too, and so-called humans. And according to the public, they slowly start to, like we had a few places, churches would ask us to go and speak on behalf of handicapped. I know I went to one church, and they asked for me to come and speak, and I said to them, and there was young children in the church, and I said, remember, when you see a child and they want to hug you, they don't mean any harm. They're just kind to you. Don't be afraid of them. That's all you had to tell them, you know, the younger kids. And the older ones, after being exposed, we had to expose them. We had to take them shopping. We had to take them to parks. We had to do that when summer was started. We had to take them once a month out into the public, either to a store or to a park or to whatever it was, and expose them so that people would see them. And after that, it seemed nobody had any problem with them. I enjoyed the children. Every little thing they learned was such a difference on them when they learned some little thing, like tying a shoe. They were so, I can tie a shoe now. And they'd come in the classroom, I can tie a shoe now, you know, and be so excited. Every little thing, were writing their name, just printing their name. Oh, they'd be so excited. And you couldn't start with their letters right off the bat. You would start at 1, you make a 1, and then put the cross, you know, those X's. Say, for instance, for a K, they'd make that first line fine, but the next 2 lines came very differently, every which way. But eventually they learned. Well, you see, it was very difficult in the beginning to get used to the children not learning very quickly. And she would always say, now you all have to take time, very softly, very kind. You have to take time. They can't learn right away. You know that. You'll find out. And it was always very gently and with the students, and her kindness is what really got me. And she was always like she reminded me so regal all the time. She sat up all the time, always listening to what your problems were. Would come down and try and settle them, but in such a kind way.
I'm Don Segan, and I live in Edmonton, Alberta. I was born and raised in Roanoke in 1963.
So when did you come to the Winifred Stewart School?
When my mom died when I was 12.
And what do you remember about being in the school?
I remember being in the school for a long time.
How long were you here?
20 years.
And what kind of things did you do?
Arithmetic, reading, writing, subtracting, go on field trips, be an athlete, and other things, you know, like playing in the gym, go swimming downstairs, and have a lot of fun.
So what do you remember about Winifred?
Nice lady and friendly. And her son was here too, Parker, Stewart. It was fun, enjoyable. A lot of work here. Lots of responsibility. Because it means that you have to build your self-esteem. You talk about your feeling, you talk about whatever's on your mind, and get it out and talk about it. That's all I know. I need another screwdriver. This one. Just like this. Just like this. This one here. Take that off. Take this off. Some other person who works in here, his name is Tim. He works in here, and they take this kind of stuff out to the back of the garages, and they empty them, then they bring more meters in, and then we do the same old job over and over.
My name is Loran Mansfield Conrad, and I'm originally from Nova Scotia. But I've been here in Edmonton since, oh, now I got to remember this, October of 1966. Winifred Stewart was a pioneer in the education of handicapped children, a pioneer in North America, actually. She was known all over North America as the pioneer of education for the mentally handicapped. Like that. She was a swell person. Oh man, I really liked working with her, like, you know. But she was always upbeat. You know, she was never, I never, in all the years that I knew her, and I never ever heard her say a cross word or a bad word about anybody or anything, like, you know. And she was very, very particular, and she was, how would you put it, always worked by the rules. I met Dr. Winifred Stewart. She came, see, I helped to set up a handicapped school in Lloydminster. Lloydminster didn't have a school for handicapped children. And when my daughter was 4 years old, I helped to start a handicapped school in Lloydminster. Now, when we got the bunch of us, I think there was 16 parents got together about this. And when they come out and says, well, we don't know anything about doing this. You know, I says, well, why don't we get in touch with the Winifred Stewart Association? Well, do you know about that? I says, well, I already met Mrs. Winifred Stewart. The way we would work, anything we wanted to change, like that, and over the years, there's always got to be changes. There's no matter what. You take your education system, look what the education system is today to what it was when I went to school, eh? If you understand what I mean, change has to come about. The most important change myself was, I would see, how would you put it? I don't know how to word this, but was the change of attitude by the, what would you say, by the parents first, and then the general public toward handicapped people. That is, in my opinion, was the biggest change that I've seen over the years, was the final, should we say, acceptance by us so-called normal people of handicapped people with handicaps. I think the biggest overall thing was when people begin to realize that these children could really learn and be much more than just being put in a home and stagnate. When people finally, parents in a sense, really got that through their heads up here that, hey, maybe my handicapped daughter or my handicapped son can learn a little something and be more useful and be a happier person. There's a point. Winifred Stewart was a very important person to Alberta because she was the pioneer of education for the mentally handicapped. I think she helped to set up every darn mentally handicapped association that was in Alberta. You know, yeah, she was excellent in that. So, say when you think back over the years, you took all this for granted. You know, you didn't think of a person then being important. I didn't think my job was important. I mean, it was just something I did. Like, you know, you don't at the time, but later on in life, like now, you reflect back on things like that and you think, well, maybe it was important. That. And myself, personally speaking, I feel very proud that I knew her and worked with her for years. It gives me a great sense of pride to say that I worked with the best person in the handicap field.
Winifred and Christine were such important advocates with amazing stories to tell. Let's do the Winifred Stewart and Christine Meikle's story worksheet in your passport. It'll show you what you've learned about their lives. Pause the video now while you work on this activity. Congratulations, you've finished Unit 13 of My History, Our Future. Next up is Life in the Community and Self-Advocacy in Alberta.